Welcome back to 1834. If you are one of the 10 or so people that watched the last couple of videos in this series, you'll know that Bourdonnais has already won this fifth match 6-4. But it's the best of 11 games, and the way that gentlemen rolled back in the day was to play all of the games even after there was a clear winner. So McDonnell has another chance to make the scoreline just a little bit better. He's going for 6-5, but I suspect that Bourdonnais doesn't care very much either way. Today's guest commentator is Baldric, because it is Remembrance Day, it's appropriate. McDonnell starts with e4, we have c5, the Sicilian, and f4, so McDonnell is going for his trademark Sicilian McDonnell attack once more. He's tried it 3 games in match 5 and won only once, so good luck McDonnell. We have e6 now, and knight to f3 continuing to develop. d5 in the centre, but McDonnell pushes straight past to e5. Knight to c6 from Bourdonnais and c3 from McDonnell, trying to build up in the centre here. Bourdonnais challenges that centre with f6, he's hitting the e5 pawn, but McDonnell leaves that alone for now and brings his bishop out to d3. Knight to h6, looking a bit weird, but the f6 square is occupied. He's going to probably bring it back into f7 as we've seen before, and also as we've seen before, McDonnell brings his bishop back to c2. Queen to b6 now, and this is pointing straight at the square that the king will end up on if he castles kingside, so we'll see what happens with this. McDonnell does actually castle here, and we have knight back to f7 as suspected. d4 in the centre, and Bourdonnais leaves this alone, and he plays his bishop to d7, just calmly developing. a3 on the queen side, and a5 in response from Bourdonnais. King to h1, getting out of the line of sight of the queen on this diagonal, and bishop to e7 from Bourdonnais. h3 from McDonnell. I'm not sure if it's too wise to start weakening the king side even more, but that's the way that McDonnell rolls. f5 from Bourdonnais, just locking up the centre. And at this point they've achieved the same position as in game number 10, though the mood order was a bit different. In that game, McDonnell went for a kingside attack with g4, but ended up with his king exposed on the right-hand side of the board and all of his pieces undeveloped on the left-hand side. So he resigned the game after only 25 moves. This time he tries making a little bit of extra space on the queen side with b3. And Bourdonnais continues with h5. He hasn't castled yet. He's hoping that the king will be exposed once more and it will be a quick end to the game. Bishop to e3 from McDonnell. He's managing to get some of his pieces out already, so this is good. And rook to c8 from Bourdonnais. McDonnell brings his second knight out to d2, so continuing to develop all of his pieces and not getting stuck in the corner like last time. And Bourdonnais goes for the pawn exchange on d4, which McDonnell accepts. Now here, Bourdonnais decides it's time to go for the real push on the king side. He's thinking that the white king is sufficiently weak that this is going to be worthwhile. McDonnell just captures this pawn, and it is quite well defended by 2 of his pieces here. So Bourdonnais doesn't try to recapture this, of course. Instead, he grabs the pawn in the centre with the other horse. Baldric suggests that McDonnell can just capture this. It's a free horse, he says, but not really, because if you were to do this, you're revealing the attack on the undefended bishop here from the queen, so not the best idea, Baldric. Instead, McDonnell captures with the knight, and this ends up being a knight exchange. And again, he doesn't want to capture back here because of the reveal attack on the bishop. So McDonnell brings his rook across to e1 to start x-raying the horse, so Bourdonnais gets it out of there again. Now the rook to e1 move that McDonnell just played does also defend this bishop, so the pawn will now be able to capture on e5 if necessary. We'll see how that works out later on. But meanwhile, they are actually even on material here. They've got the same number of pieces and the same number of pawns, although McDonnell's pawns on the king side are doubled, meaning that Bourdonnais' E and F pawns are looking a little bit mean. But we'll see what happens with that soon. We have knight to f3 from McDonnell, continuing, and we have king to f7. Bourdonnais not even going to bother castling this time. He's just going to manually maneuver his king into a better position. Rook to a2 from McDonnell, which does look a bit strange, but what I think he's doing here is he's attempting to come across to double up his rooks and then go up the centre of the board. We have bishop to d6 from Bourdonnais, getting on this very nice dark square diagonal towards the king side, and we have knight to e5 with check from McDonnell. Now Bourdonnais does have to capture here because if he moves the king out of the check, for example this way, he's going to lose the bishop, and if he moves the king anywhere else, you're going to lose the horse. So he does have to capture. The capture with the knight is on, but instead he decides to capture with the bishop, and the pawn captures back, revealing the attack upon the queen. The queen goes back to c7, and now we have bishop to d4 from McDonnell, putting a pair of defenders on this pawn because it was double attacked by the queen and the knight. By the way, the lifted rook here is doing a great job defending the bishop against the rook and the queen's attack, so some nice forethought from McDonnell there, or perhaps it was just an accident. Regardless, Bourdonnais decides to give up his attack on the central pawn and brings his queen back to d8 to attack the undefended forward g-pawn. So McDonnell simply defends with the queen, and we have h4 from Bourdonnais continuing to push on the king's side. McDonnell says, I can also continue to push, and goes for b4, trying to make something over this side, but Bourdonnais simply heads it off by pushing his a-pawn, which is defended by the d7 bishop. We have queen to e3 now. It looks like he's doubling up towards the center, maybe trying to make something of this. Bourdonnais just brings his second rook over to e8 to help out defend. At this point, it does look like McDonnell has a bit of a space advantage towards the centre of the board. Perhaps continuing to push forward with the bishop would be a good idea, but instead he does the opposite and brings it back to b1, although this does allow this rook some scope across the second rank. Bourdonnais continues with queen to e7, and indeed the second rank rook comes across to f2 to x-ray the king, so Bourdonnais gets the king out of the way to g8. Baldric has a suggestion here. He says, bring the bishop up to c5 to pressure the queen this way, which is actually a good idea. Well done, Baldric. Permission to write home immediately. But instead, McDonnell pushes g4, trying to break through on the king's side, but will he break through, or will Bourdonnais break through? Bourdonnais captures en passant, very nice. They had en passant back in 1834, and the queen recaptures here, and now he's x-raying the king again. Rook to c4 now, threatening the undefended bishop, and now McDonnell plays the bishop to c5 move. But having played this move a little bit too late for Baldric's liking, you can see that the d-pawn is now let past, and also the black rook has full scope along the fourth rank, so maybe you should have listened to Baldric, McDonnell. Perhaps bringing the queen across to here to defend the bishop would have been a better move given the circumstances, but okay, bishop to c5 was played, and now we have queen to h7 because the queen was under attack. Rook to h2 now from McDonnell, getting between the queen and the king, and bishop to c6, and you can see that this is looking pretty nasty should the pawn move. McDonnell doesn't like this one little bit, so he decides to move the king now rather than waiting for the bishop's check, and Bourdonnais advances the queen closer to the king's position. Now for McDonnell, perhaps a good idea would be to bring the bishop round to d1 to try to chase away the queen, but instead he brings his rook across to d2, and you can see now that the h4 square is available to one of three pieces, either the rook, the knight, or the queen. Which does Bourdonnais choose? He goes for the knight, and now you can see that this is threatening a big fork on f3. It's going to be check, and you're going to be picking up one of the rooks, so McDonnell moves to defend it with the king. But here comes the passed pawn, d4, letting the light square bishop out, and now three pieces are attacking the f3 square in front of the king, so McDonnell moves to defend it with rook to d3. We have now rook to d8, backing up the passed pawn, and McDonnell's position is looking increasingly desperate, so he tries a desperate move. He pushes g6. What's he doing? Well, perhaps he's trying to bait Bourdonnais into capturing this and self-pinning and causing trouble this way, but Bourdonnais does not go for it. Instead, he brings his rook up to d7 so that he can bring it across in front of the king if necessary. What does McDonnell do here? Well, he decides to double up against the passed pawn with his rook. We now have bishop to e4 from Bourdonnais, further embedding into the position and threatening this rook. And so McDonnell has to back off his rook and allow the bishop exchange to take place on b1. But now comes rook to d3, threatening the queen, so McDonnell blocks it. But now comes a check on c2, so McDonnell backs off again to f1. And now, sadly for McDonnell, it is actually mate in 7. So for example, black QE2, the Meghan Markle move, and that's check, so the king has to move across. And then you're going to push the f pawn here to threaten the queen. What is this, you say? The queen can just capture the f pawn. Well, if you do, then it's instant checkmate here, backed up by the knight and the rook. So what if you were to move the queen instead? Well, you can't move the queen anywhere because it's defending the h2 square. So, for example, if you back off, then you're getting checked this way, and after the king moves, it's checkmate with the queen on f2 instead. However, Le Bourdonnais isn't one for thinking too hard. Baldric approves of this philosophy, and instead he brings his rook across to g2. This of course attacks the queen again, so McDonnell gets the queen out of the way to e1, and Le Bourdonnais plays his queen across to g5. Now there is a nasty threat here. Should McDonnell play some crazy move like b5, then of course the queen is checking, and McDonnell is going to have to give up a whole bunch of pieces until he gets checkmated, like so. So what does McDonnell do instead of this crazy b5 move? Well, he decides to give up his queen for a knight and a rook. So he captures here, the queen captures the queen, the king captures the rook, but he should have looked one extra move ahead because he's actually given up an extra rook as well. The queen comes across for a check, and it's skewering both rooks. So even if McDonnell blocks the check like this, which he does, the queen is capturing the rook on b1. So let's be honest now, the situation is looking extremely dire for McDonnell. What can he do? Well, he continues to desperately push his pawns. The queen comes back to pin the rook again and also threaten the wing pawn, so McDonnell keeps pushing, as does Le Bourdonnais, although not quite so desperately. He's just hoping that the bar is still open. The pawns continue to get pushed. d2 now, one square away from queening, although McDonnell does have a check in the meantime, so the king goes into the corner. McDonnell brings the bishop up here to try to crowd the king, but it is rather a forlorn threat. What does Le Bourdonnais do? Well, instead of queening, he decides to grab the rook here, which is quite cheeky. After the king captures back, he's getting another queen. And in this position, finally, McDonnell resigned the game. So that's it for match number 5. The final score is 7-4 to Le Bourdonnais. Very well done to him. He deserves his crown, and deepest commiserations to McDonnell. At least he put in a few good fights. The good news is that there will be a match 6. It looks like it will be the best of 9 games, so join me again next time. I'll see you then.